the Linguaverse episode 16, The Last Word Art 2, The Future and Philosophy of Language. Welcome back to the Linguaverse. If you've been journeying with me across these episodes, you'll know this space has always been more than analysis. It's been about standing inside language, turning it over, holding it up to the light, asking not only what words mean, but what they do to us, to culture, to reality itself. We've travelled far. Arc 1 took us to the roots, language as spell, taboo, mimicry, mirror neurons, the birth of symbolic power. Arc 2 has been about the horizon, the future and philosophy of language. Together, we've traced synthetic speech, the shape-shifting of English, the limits of the ineffable, the mirror of consciousness, the fractures and multiplicity of self, the scaffolds of reality, and the enduring presence of spells. Each step asked not just, how does language work, but what world does language make possible? Now we arrive here, the 16th episode, the close of this arc, and it bears a title heavy with resonance, The Last Word. But what does that mean? Is the last word about truth, about closure, about finality? Or is it, paradoxically, the opening into another dialogue, another silence, another beginning? Philosophers have long circled this paradox. Derrida argued that words are endlessly deferred, meaning they never arrive at a final resting point. Barthes declared the death of the author, giving the last word not to the speaker, but to the reader, the interpreter. Wittgenstein ended his Tractatus with the haunting suggestion, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. And silence itself perhaps becomes the last word. But in human life we rarely treat the last word as infinite play. We treat it as decisive. A courtroom verdict, a priest's benediction, a family quarrel, the last word is the moment power crystallizes. It is authority made audible. And at times it is also the quiet that lingers after language has exhausted itself. That's where this episode begins. With the weight of finality. Let's begin the weight of finality. The last word is never neutral. It carries force, authority, and sometimes a sting. To speak last is to claim control over meaning. To be denied the last word is to be silenced, to be placed in someone else's frame. Let's explore this across domains, law, religion, family, culture, and silence itself, before turning inward, asking what it means in our own lives. Law's last word in court. The last word is more than punctuation. It is fate. The judge raises their voice, guilty, not guilty. Two words that can redraw the map of someone's life in an instant. These are not descriptive statements. They are performative. They make reality. As J.L. Austin would say in his work on speech acts, they are illocutionary force embodied. Consider the structure of a trial. The prosecution speaks, the defense responds. Arguments volley back and forth, but ultimately there must be a final word, a verdict. And in that moment, the messy turbulence of competing narratives collapses into one, the legally binding truth. The courtroom is ritualized spell work, just as much as a medieval incantation. Robes, oaths, formulaic language. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. These aren't theatrics, they are linguistic acts of binding. To break the oath is to risk perjury. To utter the final verdict is to transform possibility into permanence. And notice, no matter how much evidence or testimony has been presented, what the world remembers is the last word. The label, guilty or innocent, the sentence, 5 years, life, death. The case is closed when the last word is spoken. Language here is not only a mirror but a gavel. It brings the law into being. Religion as last word, religious traditions too understand the gravity of the last word. Think of rituals of blessing and benediction. A priest, imam, rabbi, or monk utters final words that seal the ritual. Amen. Peace be upon you. Go in peace. The ritual is not complete until the closing phrase is spoken. The same applies in funerals. Eulogies are delivered, prayers recited, and then comes the final blessing, words that both end the ceremony and transition the dead into another realm of meaning. The last word is liminal, closure for the living, passage for the departed. Sacred texts themselves often carry weight in their endings. The Quran closes with prayers for protection. The Bible's revelation ends with the line, "The grace of the Lord Jesus be with God's people. Amen." These are not casual conclusions, they are ritual last words, sealing the text with authority. Even mystical traditions, which emphasize silence, do so through last words that point beyond speech. Zen koans, paradoxical riddles, often end in bafflement, forcing the listener into silence. Apophatic theology, the via negativa, insists that the last word about God must be unsaying, a stripping away of all words. In this sense, silence is not absence but the heaviest finality. Religion knows. The last word binds communities, seals rituals, and offers closure. Family and power moves. If law and religion show the last word as institutional authority, family life shows it as an intimate power play. We've all felt it. The desire to have the last word in an argument. It isn't always about truth. Often it's about control. To say the last word is to exit on top, to declare the conversation closed. It can soothe pride, but it can also fracture relationships. In families, especially across generations, the last word often falls to elders. Parents insist on finality, because I said so. This isn't an explanation, it's an assertion. Language here isn't dialogue, it's hierarchy, but last words can wound too. Think of arguments where cruel phrases are hurled as parting shots. The sting lingers not because the words were profound, but because they were final. No chance to reply. The silence seals the harm. On the other hand, silence itself can be the last word in family dynamics. A refusal to respond, a door closing, a phone hung up. The absence of reply becomes the strongest statement of all. In personal reflection, I can recall moments where I longed to have the last word. Times I wanted to assert truth, to protect dignity, to ensure I was heard. But I've also seen moments where the last word was silence, and that silence spoke more powerfully than anything I could have said. Cultural closures beyond families. Whole cultures mark the importance of the last word. Think of how societies treat dying words. The last words of famous figures are recorded, repeated, and mythologized. We look to them as final crystallizations of meaning. Caesar's et tu, Brute, whether he actually said it or not, carries symbolic weight. Barthes reported, "Oh wow, oh wow," haunts readers as a glimpse of awe in the face of death. Why do we care? Because the last word carries an aura. It seems to distill a life into one utterance. Culturally, we also mark speeches by their final lines. Martin Luther King Jr.'s "Free at Last." Kennedy's "Ask not what your country can do for you." These phrases endure not only for their rhetoric, but for their placement, the last words, echoing after the microphone clicks off. Closure matters. Our minds crave it, and language provides it. Paradox of the last word. But here's the paradox. Sometimes the most powerful last word is none at all. Think of an argument where the other person simply walks away. The absence of reply hits harder than any shouted retort. Or in spiritual practice, when a mantra dissolves into silence, and the silence itself feels fuller than the chant. In theatre, the final blackout is as important as the final line. In music, the last note hangs, then fades into stillness, and the stillness completes the performance. Silence, too, is a word, or perhaps the last word of all. Reflection prompt. Think of a time in your own life when you wanted the last word. Why was it so important to you? What did you gain from it? What did it cost? Then think of a time when someone else had the last word, or when silence itself ended the exchange. How did that feel? Did it sting, soothe, or simply end the moment? Activity. This week, notice your relationship with the last word. In conversations, arguments, debates, even casual chats. 1. Pay attention to when you feel the urge to claim the last word. 2. Experiment with letting silence be the final act instead. 3. Afterwards, reflect. Did silence weaken your position or strengthen it? Keep a short journal of these observations. You may find that the last word is not always about power, but about awareness of how words end and how silence speaks. The linguistic endgame. If the weight of finality showed how the last word carries weight in law, religion, family, and silence, the linguistic endgame takes us deeper into the philosophical terrain of endings themselves. What does it mean to imagine a last word in a universe where words never quite settle, where meaning slips, mutates, differs, and where even when one language dies, another is born? This is the linguistic endgame, the moment we ask whether words ever truly end, and if so, what that ending means for culture, for identity, and for us. Derrida. The deferred word Jacques Derrida's work circles us back to an unsettling truth. There may never be a last word. For him, meaning is not fixed. Each word points to another, and then another, in an endless chain of references. He called this difference, the play of difference and deferral. Think about it. When I say tree, do you picture bark, leaves, forests, or a memory from childhood? The word doesn't land in one spot. It fans out. Its meaning is always deferred, never final. If this is true, the last word is an illusion. Every attempt to pin down meaning with finality only opens more doorways. Language is a hall of mirrors. No word ever truly concludes. This destabilizes our craving for closure. We long for the gavel strike, the amen, the definitive period. But Derrida whispers, there is no period, only commas disguised as full stops. In this light, the last word is never spoken, only gestured toward, endlessly postponed. Barthes, whose last word, Roland Barthes, pushes this further with his famous phrase, the death of the author. For Barthes, once words are written or spoken, they leave the author's control. Meaning is not sealed by intention, but created by interpretation. If that's the case, who owns the last word? Not the speaker, but the reader. Not the preacher, but the congregation. Not the podcaster, but you, the listener. Every last word I speak here is immediately reshaped by how you hear it, what memories or associations it awakens in you. My last word is only your beginning. So Barthes robs us of the fantasy that the final word belongs to the originator. He insists that words live on beyond us, refusing the closure we crave. The last word, then, might not be spoken by the author at all. It might not belong to anyone. Wittgenstein, silence at the edge. If Derrida and Barthes dissolve finality into endless play, Wittgenstein takes us in another direction, to the edge of silence. In his Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, after hundreds of terse propositions, he ends with this, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. This is more than resignation. It is an admission that language has limits. Some truths, mystical, ethical, existential, cannot be captured in words. At that boundary, silence is not weakness but fidelity. Here, the last word is silence. Not because nothing remains, but because everything remains unspeakable. Think of times you've reached this point, unable to explain grief or awe or revelation. Words fail, and in the hush, something larger is present. For Wittgenstein, the last word is not another word at all, but the act of honoring what exceeds language. Language death, when tongues fall silent. But what about when language itself dies? Across the world, thousands of languages are disappearing. Linguists estimate that one language dies every 2 weeks. With each loss, a whole world of thought, metaphor, memory, and meaning vanishes. When the last speaker of a language passes away, we might say the tongue itself has spoken its last word. This is not only cultural loss, it is existential. Each language encodes unique ways of perceiving reality. When it dies, so does a mode of consciousness. Consider Ayak, a native Alaskan language that lost its last fluent speaker in 2008, or Yupik, once spoken in the Caucasus, whose final native speaker died in 1992. With each passing, libraries of human experience close forever. Here the last word is literal, an end to a linguistic lineage that once carried lifetimes of memory. And yet even then, fragments survive. Dictionaries, recordings, words borrowed into other tongues. The last word is never entirely last, echoes ripple onward. Personal reflection, the end that isn't an end. When I reflect on my own work, the Inversiverse, the unfiltered human, my inner child was broken, and now the Linguaverse. I sometimes wonder whether each piece is a last word of sorts. A chapter closes, an arc is complete, a book is published. It feels final. And yet, once the words are out, they take on lives of their own. Listeners and readers interpret them differently from what I intended. Listeners hear resonances I didn't predict. I've learned that my last word is never truly mine. It's always picked up, reshaped, refracted. And in that sense, there is no last word, only a widening of dialogue. Perhaps that's why I no longer fear endings in the same way. Each last is another beginning. Each closure folds into another unfolding. The last word, personal, cultural, civilizational. This brings us to the central tension. Is the last word ever truly final? Personal last words. The sentences we speak before death, the notes we leave behind, the phrases that summarize our lives. Cultural last words, the slogans, epilogues, and endings that societies cling to in rituals, texts, and myths. Civilizational last words, the potential silence of humanity itself, when one day, perhaps, no one remains to speak. Each of these carries weight, but each is also porous, because even as one voice ends, another hears, another interprets, another continues. The last word may exist locally, in a conversation, in a life, in a culture, but universally, perhaps never. Reflection prompt. Is the last word something you own, or something others give you? Think of a time you felt you had the last word, in an argument, in a letter, in a work of art. Then ask yourself, did it stay yours, or did others reshape it? How does this change your sense of what finality in language really means? Activity 1. Imagine that you had to choose one last word, not a sentence, but a single word, to be carved in stone as the summation of your life. 2. Write it down. 3. Then write down 3 possible interpretations of that word from the perspective of others, a friend, a critic, a stranger. 4. Compare. Is your last word really final, or does it fracture into multiple meanings depending on who holds it? This exercise will show you, viscerally, how language escapes control, and how the last word may never truly belong to us alone. Death, silence, and the unspeakable language may never arrive at a true last word, always deferred, refracted, or lost with the death of languages themselves. Then this section turns to the most visceral frontier of all, death itself. Because when we speak of the last word, we often mean it literally. The last utterance of a human life. The final breath that carries not only air but meaning. The sentence was left behind as an inheritance. The words spoken or unspoken as consciousness slips into silence. Death has always been a crucible for language. Every civilization has recorded, mythologized, or revered the final words of its leaders, poets, prophets, and martyrs. Yet death is also where words collapse, where silence speaks louder than any syllable, where the unspeakable lives, not as absence, but as presence too vast for articulation. This tension between last words preserved in stone and silence that resists inscription is what we explore here. Famous last words, rehearsed or revealed. Something is haunting about humanity's obsession with last words. Collections of them are published, shared, repeated across centuries. Socrates, condemned to death, drinking hemlock, said, "Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Pay it and do not neglect." A cryptic reference, perhaps thanking the god of healing for release from illness that was life itself. Oscar Wilde on his deathbed in a shabby Paris hotel. Either that wallpaper goes or I do. A wit's last stand, refusing to abandon humour even as death arrived. Karl Marx, reportedly responding to a maid asking for a last word. Go on, get out, last words are for fools who haven't said enough. A refusal of the very premise. We love these fragments because they seem to crystallize a life. to give us one final clue, one epigram that sums up the essence of a person. But here's the tension. How many of these are rehearsed, embellished, misremembered, or invented? How many last words survive only because someone else recorded them, and in doing so, transformed them? The last word in this sense is rarely pure. It is mediated, curated, mythologized, a spell cast on memory, more than an authentic transmission from the dead, the linguistic ritual of death. Why does it matter so much what someone says at the threshold of death? Because language is how we seek continuity against silence. Death is rupture, but words are bridges. A last word functions like a ritual, sealing a life, making the unbearable narratable. Even in ordinary families, last words take on weight. People remember the final phone call, the last text, the last whispered phrase. Whether trivial or profound, those words expand in memory, charged with retrospective meaning. I'll see you tomorrow becomes unbearable when tomorrow never comes. I love you becomes a treasure. A fragment of irritation, don't forget the bin, can echo for years, reminding us that last words aren't always poetic. Here we glimpse how linguistic acts outlive their speakers, reshaped endlessly by those who remain. Silence as the final word, but often there are no words. Many die in silence, whether through unconsciousness, incapacity, or simple refusal to speak. And this silence can be just as powerful as words. It becomes a canvas for projection, memory, and interpretation. The silence of a loved one may be remembered as peaceful acceptance, or unbearable absence, or even defiance. Philosophically, silence is not emptiness. As Wittgenstein taught us, silence marks the boundary of what can be said, and beyond that boundary lies the ineffable. Religions across the world elevate silence as the truest language of the divine. In apophatic theology, via negativa, God is approached not by saying what God is, but by stripping away words until only silence remains. In Zen Buddhism, enlightenment is often conveyed not in lectures, but in wordless gestures, a raised finger, a laugh, a silence. In Christian monasticism, silence is cultivated as discipline, the fertile ground of listening. In this sense, silence is not the absence of the last word, but the last word itself, spoken without speech. Trauma, the unspeakable, and death's shadow, but silence is not always sacred. Sometimes it is imposed. In trauma studies, there's a recurring phrase, the unspeakable. Survivors of violence, war, abuse, or catastrophe often describe their experiences as beyond words. Not because nothing happened, but because what happened ruptures the symbolic order. Language falters at the threshold of horror. Death sits close to this shadow. To confront it, whether our own mortality or that of others, often leaves us wordless. We grope for metaphors, passed away, gone to a better place, lost, because the bluntness of dead feels unbearable. Here we see how language tries to soften the blow, to shield us from the rawness of reality. Euphemisms become small spells of protection, yet they also reveal language's limits. The unspeakable cannot be erased, only deferred. Personal resonances, where silence spoke more. I think of moments in my own life where words collapsed. During my spiritual awakening, I didn't emerge with a sentence. It came in stillness, during meditation, like a portal opening in the mind. What followed were visions, perspectives, shifts in perception, but the experience itself was wordless. Only later, in writing, could I begin to frame it. And I realized, words can illuminate, but they can also diminish. Sometimes silence preserves truth more faithfully than speech. Similarly, in grief, I found words both necessary and insufficient. We speak to comfort, to connect, to share pain, but often the deepest solidarity comes not in talking, but in sitting quietly with someone. The silence itself communicates what words cannot. These experiences remind me that the last word may not be spoken at all. It may be the hush that holds presence. Language, death, and cultural memory culturally, we don't let silence rest easily. We build rituals around last words because we cannot bear the thought of lives ending without language. Obituaries, epitaphs, and eulogies are all attempts to give the dead their last word, even if they never spoke it. We narrate on their behalf, inscribing meaning where silence threatened to erase. This is where language becomes memorial, words as tombstones against the abyss. But there is danger here too. Whose words are remembered and whose vanish? The famous leave behind libraries of last words. The poor, marginalized, or silenced often leave none. Even in death, linguistic inequality persists. Beyond speech, music, gesture presence, yet not all last words are verbal. Some are embodied. A squeeze of the hand, a glance, a sigh. These gestures can speak louder than syllables. They are linguistic in a broader sense, semiotic acts of meaning-making, but they remind us that the last word may be carried not in sound, but in presence. In fact, many cultures treat non-verbal acts as last words, the closing of eyes, the final exhale, the positioning of the body. These become texts to be read, interpreted, and ritualized. In this way, even the body becomes a speaker, uttering its final sign. Death as mirror of language. If language is always reaching, never arriving, then death becomes the ultimate mirror of this process. We long for finality, but receive only ambiguity. We desire the last word, but encounter silence or endless interpretation. We want meaning to be sealed, but it slips from our grasp. Perhaps this is why death and language have always been entwined. Both remind us of limits, both haunt us with absence, both reveal that finality is more myth than reality. Reflection prompt. Think back to a time you were present with death of a loved one, a stranger, even in a story or film that struck you deeply. What role did language play in that moment? Were there words spoken that became charged with new meaning? Or was silence the more powerful presence? What does this teach you about the connection between death and the last word? Activity. Here is an exercise to engage with this theme. 1. Set a timer for 3 minutes. 2. Sit in silence without speaking or writing. Simply observe. 3. At the end, write down the first word that surfaces in your mind. 4. Treat this word as if it were your temporary last word. 5. Reflect. Why this word? What does it reveal about what your mind clung to in silence? This practice mirrors death in miniature, the collapse of language into stillness, and the emergence of a word as a marker of meaning. Reclaiming the last word. There is something about the phrase, the last word, that carries an almost magnetic pull. In conversations, debates, and even arguments whispered under our breath, we seem to hunger for it, to land the point, to feel that stamp of finality, the temptation of closure. But when I reflect on the meaning of this phrase in lived reality, I notice how often chasing the last word leads not to resolution, but escalation. Instead of closure, the last word becomes a contest of endurance. Who can hold on longest? Who can craft the sharpest rebuttal? Who refuses to let silence be the final punctuation? I've seen this in moments of stress, in heated discussions where each side begins to mirror the other's intensity, where every word is both shield and weapon. What fascinates me, both personally and linguistically, is how the fight for the last word is rarely about meaning. It's about nervous systems in conflict, about embodied states, about the spell of language pulling us into cycles of defensiveness and repetition. And so, to reclaim the last word, we first need to step back. We need to ask, what exactly is the last word, and why does it matter? The linguistic spell of finality language scholars remind us that certain words do not simply describe reality, they perform it. J.L. Austin called these speech acts, utterances that do things rather than merely describe. I do in a wedding ceremony. You're hired. You're guilty. These are words that enact realities. The last word functions in a similar way. It carries symbolic weight because it is not only a phrase, it is the punctuation of interaction. The last word says, this conversation is finished, and I control its ending. That's why the last word so often becomes a power struggle. To seize it is to claim authority. To yield is to risk feeling small, silenced, or invalidated. But here lies the paradox. Sometimes the most powerful last word is silence itself. Nervous systems in conflict. Let's shift lenses. Imagine two people in a heated exchange. One is leaning forward, voice rising, heartbeat accelerating. The other interrupts, matching tone and rhythm. Back and forth it goes, the nervous systems of both individuals escalating, feeding off one another like mirrors locked in feedback loops. From the perspective of nervous system language, NSL, what we are seeing is not just two sets of words colliding, but two regulatory systems spiraling. Each word becomes a signal, threat, defense, escalation. Neither is truly listening. Both are fighting to regulate through dominance. Physiologically, here's what happens. Amygdala activation, the brain's alarm system fires. Each word spoken by the other is processed as a potential threat. Sympathetic arousal. Heart rate spikes, breath shortens, muscles tighten. Words accelerate, volume increases. Broca's area narrowing. Under stress, language production becomes more rigid and repetitive. The last word is demanded not because it carries meaning, but because the nervous system craves closure. Seen this way, the last word is not intellectual. It is somatic. It is the body demanding relief from tension. The mirror linguistic hypothesis in action. This is where the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, becomes crucial. MLH suggests that when we speak, we not only send semantic content, but also neural cues that mirror in our listeners' nervous systems. Tone, rhythm, and pacing. All these elements ripple through both speaker and hearer, creating states of resonance or dissonance. In a conflict scenario, this means each attempt at the last word becomes an echoed spike in both bodies. Repetition is not accidental. It is the nervous system trying to complete the loop through language. The last word functions less like a conclusion and more like a nervous system plea. Help me regulate by letting me finish. Here, silence or deliberate de-escalation can act as a counterspell. When one party stops, slows their breath, and allows words to dissipate, the mirroring effect shifts. The loop begins to break. Detachment and the gift of silence. What then does it mean to reclaim the last word? It means recognizing that the last word is not always worth having. Detachment here is not indifference. It is awareness, the ability to notice I don't need this. I don't need to push for recognition from someone who is not ready to give it. I don't need to hold on to the rope in a tug of war where both sides only exhaust themselves. This is where NSL offers practical tools. When I feel the heat of wanting the last word, I can tune in, breath shallow, Shoulders tense? Jaw tight? These are my body's signs that the conversation has moved from meaning into a nervous system battle. At that moment, the most compassionate last word I can give is not to the other person, but to myself. A phrase like, let it pass, or even a simple grounding breath, a signal to my nervous system that safety does not depend on verbal victory. This reframing allows me to see silence not as weakness, but as mastery, a counterspell against cycles of escalation, the cultural obsession with the last word. Yet we live in societies where the last word is celebrated. Courts, debates, social media threads all thrive on closing arguments, on final tweets, on being the one to own the conversation. Look at online discourse. The thread doesn't end until someone drops the mic. Memes circulate, comments pile on, and the crowd signals who won. But what if no one wins? What if, in clinging to the last word, we only reinforce division? This is why reclaiming the last word matters at a cultural scale too. It means resisting the spell of closure as power. It means recognizing that in dialogue, the point is not always to finish, but to continue to leave open space where new words can emerge. Spells of self-soothing. One of the most powerful insights for me has been recognizing that sometimes the last word should not be outward at all. It should be inward. Instead of fighting to say the final phrase to another person, I can speak to myself. A quiet, grounding mantra, a linguistic anchor for regulation. This is where NSL and MLH converge beautifully. By speaking a soothing phrase to myself, it's safe to release. I send neural cues through my own system. By shifting my tone to softness, even internally, I alter the resonance of my state. By choosing silence after that phrase, I let my body feel what language pointed toward. Release. In this way, the last word becomes not a contest but a practice. Not outward closure, but inward grounding. Scenario. The heated debate. Let's imagine a scenario that illustrates this. Two colleagues are debating at work. The project has hit delays and blame is flying. One insists the deadlines were unrealistic. The other retorts that execution was sloppy. Back and forth they go, each insisting on the truth. The last word hovers like a prize. Whoever claims it will feel vindicated. But what's actually happening beneath the surface? Nervous system escalation, stress hormones spike, narrowing perception. Each word is filtered through defensiveness. Mirroring, tone sharpens, rhythm speeds. Both regulate against each other, not with each other. Loss of semantic depth, words flatten into repeated points. The richness of language collapses into blunt instruments. Now imagine one pauses, breath slows. Instead of replying, they said, I hear your frustration. Let's leave it here for now. The other might bristle. They might still want the last jab. But the spell has shifted. Silence opens. The last word ceases to be about dominance and instead becomes about choice. This is the gift of detachment. Not indifference, but freedom. Reframing the last word through linguistically, this reframing has profound implications. Pragmatics. The function of language is not only to transfer meaning, but to perform social acts. Choosing silence or a soft final phrase alters the entire pragmatic field. Phonology and prosody. Tone, rhythm, and stress shape how words land. The last word spoken calmly carries more resonance than 1,000 shouted. Sociolinguistics. The cultural value of the last word reflects hierarchies of power. In reclaiming it, we resist domination and open alternative models of dialogue. Thus, the linguistic self becomes empowered not by winning words, but by choosing how and whether to end them. Toward a universal practice, reclaiming the last word, then, is less about control and more about consciousness. It is about recognizing when words have slipped into cycles of escalation. When my nervous system, not my reason, is driving the exchange. When silence may serve as the most powerful counterspell. It is about making the last word something inward, soothing, chosen. A spell spoken to oneself for grounding and release. Activity, the last word ritual 1. Recall a recent conversation where you felt the pull of the last word. 2. Write down the phrases you said and the ones you wanted to say but held back. 3. Now, write a single phrase you wish had been your last word. Make it soothing, grounding, not argumentative. Something like, I release this, or let it pass. 4. Repeat this phrase quietly 3 times. Notice how your body responds. 5. Next time you feel the pull for the last word, try giving this phrase not to the other person, but to yourself. This is not about erasing conflict. It's about reclaiming choice. And so we arrive at the close of Arc 2, and at the closing spell of this episode. We began with synthetic speech, wondering what happens when words no longer need bodies. We travelled through English's mutations, the ineffable silences, the scaffolding of consciousness, the multiplicity of selves, the social construction of reality, and the power of spells woven into every system. Now, at the threshold of the last word, we see that language is never final. Every ending is another beginning. Every silence makes room for new speech. The last word is not about dominance. It is about awareness. It is about choosing when to speak, when to soothe, when to release. It is about recognizing that sometimes the truest last word is no word at all, just breath, presence, and the body's own language. And as we turn the page, we look ahead. Episode 16 will bring us to the last word in title and in theme, asking whether language itself has an end, or whether it endlessly unfolds. Until then, here is the thought on last words I leave you with. Will this be the end of the series, or will a sequel follow? Embrace the silence of what happens in between. This is the power of being present, aware, and making conscious choices in life. Thanks for listening. Stay curious, stay awake to your own language, and remember, every last word is only the first step into another conversation. You've been listening to the Linguaverse. I am James Miller.